Right. So my name is Edvins. People call me sometimes Ed too, so that's fine. I'm a front-end engineer. I've been working for 8-9 years with a variety of companies, startups and scale-ups and all of that sort of stuff. And I think a lot of companies share kind of the same pitfalls and the same issues with performance, and not many people, companies or engineers are using these solutions which are available and fairly easy to implement for their applications. And this is why, you can scan this QR code, because in the end of the slides there will be a couple of links for the further readings. So I think there are kind of common reasons why applications suffer with the performance issues. It can be either kind of inefficient code like scalability issues, network latency, large file sizes, and all of that sort of stuff. But I think it's really hard to cover pretty much everything, so I predominantly focus on the code splitting part of it and working with the inefficient code and how it can be kind of optimized to make so we can make it better. And I think in order to understand that you have the performance issue, you need to first of all to figure it out and sort of monitor it first, because if you don't really care, you probably might not even notice that you have something weird going on. I mean, from my perspective, there are a lot of tools like Chrome DevTools, React Developer Tools, like even Lighthouse, Sentry for error logging, because even sometimes performance issue can be due to the simple fact of the errors, the code errors actually. And yeah, I think if your React application is built bundled with the Webpack, there is Webpack Bundle Analyzer. It's a fairly cool thing that it can visualize the size of your kind of Webpack output, and this is how. And you can basically go through all of the chunks and all of the files you have in your bundle, and this is how you can find maybe something is not supposed to be there, at least maybe at the initial render. Let's discuss what is code splitting. Effectively, it's self-explanatory. You split the code, right? And you take something big and split it into the small chunks. And why we need to do that? Because it just makes your application and website faster. You can load it faster, and it improves the overall performance of your application. And I think in the majority of cases, that type of the improvements of performance improvement, it lead to the happier user base. And we can have a quick look at the next example. For example, that's the Airbnb, and that's the initial load. For example, I hit the Airbnb, and you can instantly see that they are doing the code splitting. You could see a lot of chunks being loaded, and that's fairly effective. And for example, if I click on this show map, they sort of lazy load an extra. For example, they lazy load WebGL.js, which is 200 kilobytes, and effectively that's just a real world example how they utilizing this technique in order to increase their performance. So yeah, I mean, I didn't made up that fact. I literally Googled it, and I'm not, from my perspective, I'm not really sure if it can actually decrease the initial bundle size by 50%. I really want to believe that, because there is a high chance that maybe you can get at least a third of it, yeah. In case anyone have any actual real examples, we can talk about that after the talk. And sometimes when the developers don't really care about the code splitting, they after sometimes they can realize, oh, why my JavaScript bundle size is so big? Like, it's huge. But no one basically took any of these steps to prevent it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, I've mentioned a couple of times like JavaScript bundle size, but why it's so important? Why I'm keep mentioning it? I mean, it directly affects the browser, how the initial page load, and as your application grows, especially if you're working on a code base for months, years, and it keeps on growing, it means your JavaScript bundle size keep getting bigger and bigger. Effectively, it takes more and more time to load your application. So the idea is behind the code splitting is that we will distribute it and split it in chunks and load those things when we need them. So yeah, I think I've mentioned it here. And yeah, I mean, in the React world, there are multiple ways how you can achieve it. I think since React team released React Lazy with Suspense, I think everyone started using it. But I think before that, everyone was using the loadable components. And yeah, I think people still use loadable components for the code bases, more like legacy ones, which hasn't been sort of like upgraded to the latest one. So let's take a look at the example of how React Lazy with Suspense work. If actually you just import Lazy Suspense and then you sort of preload homepage straight away, and by the time we come to the app, we can already see the homepage being loaded lazily. And loadable components, pretty much the same thing, the same idea, the same fallback and all of that sort of stuff. It's just a bit of the different syntax and how you can use it. Plus, it's an external package too. So I think developers who are not keen just importing the loadable now, they just stick to the React Lazy. Okay, and so now we know like at least two ways how we can do that. And I think there are common patterns or techniques like how you can try to use that kind of fairly basic thing and try to improve your code base like in general. So I think there is like, which I personally like, is the route-based code splitting. Effectively, yeah, we will go one by one a bit later on. So yeah, after that, preloading is effectively you just preload your component and then render it, and then inlining critical CSS and dynamic chunks. So obviously the core idea is to code split. So they all share the kind of the similar approach. I think it's all about like how you want to utilize it and how you want to actually kind of use it. So let's take a look at the route-based code splitting. So the idea is that you start with importing all of those kind of your pages basically, and then within the app you display the page only when it needs to hit it. So when the application loads, you get to the home page, but the user don't really care about the about page. So effectively, while I'm on the home page and landing page, my JavaScript bundle size won't have anything related to the about page. Fairly straightforward. And preloading. Effectively, that's the code example which we just saw from the initial kind of React Lazy thing. Yeah, it's very straightforward. I think preloading, it comes kind of, the idea of preloading is that you preload sort of like a specific component. Maybe you have an initial list, for example, of items which you display, and then you have the case like Airbnb had. They had a like map which very heavy component to load, and that's the great example when you can start kind of using the lazy and suspense. Another approach is inlining critical CSS. So I think I saw a couple of cases how people are using it. I'm not really sure if I'm a big fan of it. I think it mainly comes to the fact that there is a lot of things you need to do and maintain. I'm lazy as hell, and I can't imagine kind of thinking, especially when you're working with a team of 5-10 developers who are sharing the same code base. It might potentially have some sort of like maintenance issues, but it's still kind of overall, I think it improves. It improves kind of the results, and I think the key factor is that inlining critical CSS improves like first content for paint and first input delay. Effectively, these are the metrics. I'm not really sure who actually tracking it. I'm sure someone actually does, but yeah, I'm not really. I don't think that I'm kind of bought into using that approach. So this is how it looks. So if actually we are using it with the style components, we are declaring the global style. That's our critical CSS basically. We will inline that part of the code, and it will be loaded before our header. And header is just like a random component which we call here. If actually at this stage, this is where our code splitting should basically begin. And the idea is that we can have like many different approaches, and we can lazy load different files, components, like, but the core idea is that global styles will be loaded anyway. They will be loaded first, and then all of that conditioning which will happen in like with the header or any of the page, that's more like how it's called. Yeah, I mean global styles will be visible for sure, and then that will be the optional part, which up to the developer. My god, I forgot this word. Anyway, you got the idea. If you didn't, ask me a question later. And then dynamic chunks. So effectively, chunks, code splitting, it's kind of all of the same genre. You split something. And with the dynamic chunks, I think the core idea is that if you have a like big, like really huge component, and you don't really want to import it straight away as it is, you can take just that one, for example, React component, and then split it into its own chunks and then load it separately. So for example, this is our large file JS. We use the React Lazy to load both of the components, and then within the we lazily load a couple of components there, and then we extract them from the large file without caring about the rest of it. I think it's a fairly good technique too. I still have like thoughts then why someone would keep extra code if it's not kind of important, but yeah, I think it's all about kind of the architectural issue. But yeah, that's another approach which can be taken. Yeah. So yeah, the core idea once again is to reduce the initial page load. Yeah, and improve performance. I remember I've been working with one of the startup, and CTO told me that, hey Ed, it's like our users don't really care about your tech debt or like code splitting thing. It's all about like how quickly you can deliver things. And I was like, for me, I think it was like long time ago. I don't remember like what year it was, but it feels like I was a junior or something like that. And it was like eye-opening for me because I was so focused like on doing kind of engineering things and working with the code base, but in the reality we still need to understand that we need to, as an engineers, as a developers, we need to bring the business value to the application. I think I still strongly believe that within the code splitting, it's very straightforward to implement, and it brings a lot of value to the end user. So what we have here, but oh yeah, and on that note, and the idea is that sometimes we are caught up with things and we don't have a capacity to do X, Y, Z. And within the latest updates from the React team and from the React ecosystem, there are a lot of things which are happening right now, and they're called like React server components. And the idea is that it's sort of like already handling all of that code splitting. It's already handling the code splitting for the developers. I think server components, like React server components, were initially announced like back in 2020, and only recently like the meta frameworks like Next.js started to introducing them. And I think it was kind of interesting for me because I haven't touched server components yet myself, but yeah, I also received like an email from Edgar's like, hey, can you do a talk in 10 days? I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And yeah, I started kind of looking at how many things there are which can simplify the code splitting for you. And yeah, I mean, React server components, they're kind of doing it on your behalf, so you don't really need to worry about it. And I've started basically trying to figure it out like more, like, but why? What is the benefit for it? And because the core idea behind the React server components is that they come with the they come with the zero bundle size, and effectively they split the server. So within the Next.js ecosystem, they split everything within the server components and client components. I think they recently introduced the idea behind the client component. And what it means is that by default within the Next.js, every single component that you write, it's server component. So in order to create the client component, which will be taken out of the initial render from the initial JavaScript bundle, you need to specify, for example, like use client. Let's take a look at the example from the 9brains. So that's the landing page. So the idea is that they have couple of things. For example, we can see now navigation bar, main, and footer. So effectively, this can be these server components because they can be loaded on a server. But then we have the search input button, email input button. Those things, they must be the client components. And the idea is that by defining them as client components, you eliminating them from the DOM straight away, and effectively you don't need to, and that's it. You don't really need to think about like using like React Lazy or something like that. It's already done for you. Yeah, it's in the Next.js, I think 13 plus. And the idea is that Yeah, I mean, it just like once again, I keep talking about pretty much the same thing. It just like reducing the initial page load and just to making sure it loads fast, because I guess for many businesses and many like web applications, speed is crucial and speed is important. That's the client component. So for example, how it looks. So in order to make sure that Next.js would treat it as the client component, you just specify as a use client, and that's pretty much it, and it won't. So that code won't run on the server. And I think another great point about the Next.js is that Next.js is doing the route-based code splitting for you, so you don't need to implement it there too. So with React Server components getting more and more popular, I think Redwood.js, they recently announced that they will fully kind of rewriting their architecture into going like full mode with server components, and as well as Remix. That's another JavaScript framework for building full stack web applications. They're working on a proof of concept too. So I think more and more kind of people trying to move towards that code splitting by default, and that's fairly smart, and that's in a way that a lot of people are basically not lazy, but maybe, as I said, don't have a capacity to do XYZ thing, and this is how the technology can help us a bit. But we talked about like the server components, client components, but when do you need to use what? For example, that's for the server components. If you're interested in like fetching data, access backend resources, like having the sensitive information and keeping large dependencies on the server, that's the server components. All of the work will be done there, and that's pretty much it. But then when it comes for the client, that's your sort of like interactivity. And event listeners, like on change, on click, on all of that sort of stuff. Use state and React lifecycle methods, custom hooks, browser-only APIs, and also React class components. So that's your client components. Effectively, they will be taken out of the initial render and will be loaded after the server components finish loading. Not gonna lie, so in the Next.js, there is like the whole blog post about like the patterns if you are going to mix like server components with client components and all of that sort of stuff. I've saved that link for everyone to have a look at the end of the slides. I will show you a bit later, but yeah, it's very interesting to see. And I was reviewing one of the application. So effectively, the dude just wanted to build the sort of like open source software as a service, like full application with Stripe and everything, and open source the code. And just because he was playing like with the React Server components and with Next.js, and I think it's called taxonomy or something like that. There is a link to in the end, and it's fairly interesting, the code base, to see if you're interested in learning more about how you can implement React Server components there. And yeah, so effectively, yeah, so that's the latest update from the React team. I also suggest taking a look at Dems Abramov. He basically, a few days ago, he started a long post in the GitHub discussions for some reason about the React Server components and like the future of it. that's the TX SHA-CN. So that's the example of software as a service, effectively small startup that you can basically run, and it's written in the Server components. It's fairly interesting code base. That's the link when it comes to the understanding more about how you can mix the server components and client components within the Next.js, and that's the just the regular like server components architecture in general. And yeah, I guess that's it on my end. Thank you.
What do you think from user perspective? What is better for a 10-page application? Single JavaScript file, which is loaded once and cached until rebuilt, or like snappy experience with loaders, which appearing on every switch between pages?
I mean, we first of all, we don't know the size, the metrics, like how big it is, how long does it take, and we also don't know the business context of it. For example, if we are interested, if the user wants to have something like on the screen straight away, like within 1 or 2 seconds, or either, for example, then it probably, I would start with gathering more information in order to figure out like what this my general user is going to do, like how it's interacting with my application, on all of that sort of stuff. But I would probably still think that loading smaller chunks, which you can cache, it's a bit easier. Plus, it's faster, especially if user is using the crappy like internet connection or something like that.
But maybe in the first case, if you have like larger file, you are loading it once. That like I don't know, you have like start screen with one loader, and then you just like click through it.
Yeah, but I guess that's a business question, as I said, because you need to learn your user first, and in order to specify, like, I mean, to satisfy him. If the user have the demand for your application, he can wait like 10 seconds, and that's fine for him. Fine. I mean, in the end, it's not a developer really question to answer. It's more like business analysts to tell us, or to tell engineers like, what do we want to achieve?
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the talk. From experience, I can tell that it's a very slippery slope when it comes to any performance optimizations, because at one hand, you don't want to start them prematurely, too early, because you will waste your time, obviously. And on the opposite end of the spectrum is when you are too late to optimize something, and customers have already left you, and nobody wants to use your product because it's too slow. So, and you made that quote from your manager, which basically confirms this thesis. So, from your experience now, could you tell me what is your kind of personal threshold when it comes to deciding that, okay, now is the time, now I have to wrap my sleeves and start optimizing?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. In a way, if I would be starting the project like today, I would probably use something like Next.js, which has a lot of things out of the box, or even like thinking about using the, I'm not saying remix now. If for example I would be starting writing the web applications from scratch, I would definitely use the Next.js and use everything what I have straight out of the box. But I mean, the ideas of the performance issues is that you need to some sort of have a constant monitoring of like what's happening to your application, and sometimes people don't realize that they have the performance issue without actually starting to paying attention like what's going on with their application, and usually when that thing comes it means that something is already happening and they need some help with their data optimization, let's say.
But if you already have gathered all the data and you have all kind of metrics available to you, when do you decide that, okay, now is the time, like my website is too slow, now I have to do something about it? Is it milliseconds, seconds? Is it something else? Is it when users start shorting your page, or?
Yeah, I guess the idea is that it comes also, a lot of things are coming from the engineer maturity, and some things like using React Lazy with that couple of code snippets, it's like straight off the box thing. And or even like using React Loadable if you have an older sort of like legacy code base which is not like upgraded to using hooks yet. And I guess, yeah, a lot of comes to the engineers and their standards and practices. I think with the code splitting, it's like one of the lowest hanging fruit you can basically get. And a lot of things can be done as early as possible, I guess.
Got it, thank you.
The question about server-side components and maybe Next.js, is it this more on the server-side templating language like Twig or other templating and the returning static HTML, or are there also different use cases for this server-side component rendering?
I think they're just return just like a standard HTML. That's probably my guess.
Did you think about adding into your list code splitting things, the micro frontends? And if yes, why did you not include it?
I mean, I think a couple of months ago we had a chat. We had an engineer basically giving a talk about the micro frontends, and I'm not really bought into that whole idea, and probably this is why I didn't even kind of consider it. And micro frontend, it's a bit something beyond the React, and I'm basically try to deeply focus on the React thing, I guess. But yeah, if you haven't been previously here, you can go to the DevClub.lv, and there is a video on the micro frontend, which happened like 1 or 2 months ago. So yeah, it's really interesting to see. Any other questions? Cool.
Okay,
Chocolate time.
Chocolate time.